Hi, it's Heath, and you're back for another edition of Media Diet Comics Commentary. Today we're going to talk about a self-published comic called Holler #2, done by a fella named Jeremy Massey. Now, Jeremy seems to be mostly a webcomics guy, does these books funded on Indiegogo. He's done 2 Indiegogo campaigns, one for the first issue, one for the second issue, currently working on the third issue, and he's also done some other work. He's done like a Supers Team book. He did a graphic novel called All My Ghosts, which is about a small town newspaper in West Virginia, or in Southwest Virginia, rather. And he's been doing this book for a while as well. And I picked this up at the local comic shop because it reminded me of a lot of the independent kind of semi-autobiographical rock and roll comics that came out in the 90s, mostly out of Washington State. And this book is very much inspired by and influenced by that, but does his own thing. Follows the adventures of a band called Magnesium Mama, which is active in the 90s in the Appalachian Mountains of Southwest Virginia. And Jeremy's also involved in music currently, does a lot of band posters and flyers, and I think plays in a band himself. And so a lot of this could be drawn from actual real-life experience as well as total fiction for the comics. And there's 4 characters in the band. There's the narrator, whose name is Mark. He's a church-going guitarist, and that plays a role in a backup story that we'll talk about in a moment. There's a guitarist named Jay, who seems to be the person who takes the band most seriously. Another person named Dave plays the bass, kind of a goth kid, rumored at the school to be gay, gets involved in musical theater with one of the other band members' girlfriends, and that's kind of the center point of this issue's storyline. And then the last band member's named Phil, drummer, skater, kind of a rabble-rouser, and kind of the Greek chorus or conscience in this comic. He's prescient in a couple of ways, or at least plays that role in the comic. And there's 2 other main characters, Cassie and Jennifer, girlfriends. Cassie from another town over, she's dating Jay, the guitarist, introduces Dave to musical theater, gets him involved in a production of Grease with her, and that ends up being and creating the first crisis for the band. Distracts Dave from the band. Rehearsals are more challenging, practice is more challenging. He's got other stuff going on because if you've ever done theater, you know the rehearsal schedule can be relatively intense. And then once production gets underway and the show is being staged, it actually threatens a relatively promising show opportunity for the band. And that is frustrating to the other band members and to Jay, Cassie's boyfriend in particular. They could have had a slot playing with a band called Jabberwocky at their local place called The Bistro. Fictional in the story, of course, and leads to a fight, a lot of jealousy and anger. And the comic is wonderful. It is quiet, it is funny, it is relatively slow-paced and gentle. Massey's art, more so in All My Ghosts, which I haven't read in completion yet, reminds me a little bit of Seth or Dan Clowes. So there's definitely a Fantagraphics Pacific Northwest influence going on here, but also elements of some other comics of the time. I see aspects of hate in this book, and it was a fun read. And so I want to show some highlights. First is that it's an interesting shape and size. This trim size, not quite a 10-inch record, but roughly a 10-inch record. Might be half legal. I'd have to check that out. But art relatively decent, softly cartoony. This image of Phil throughout the book reminds me of Fat Mike from Fat Records pretty consistently. Let's see, but what do I like? This panel work I really like. I like the phone line being the border to accentuate that it's a phone conversation. I thought that was pretty innovative and interesting, although I'm sure that it's been done before. I liked the color palette for the scenes at night as the crisis is leading to a head. This panel in particular I thought was tremendous. Actually, those 2 panels I thought were excellent. But But a couple of other things I really, really liked. I liked the change of the color palette for the flashback to set off the flashback scenes from the current day scenes. And there was one other thing. The backup stories. There are two backup stories. One focuses on a character who's only... This handy bio snapshot page is a great idea for someone just coming to the book. I was actually starting to make notes on my own about who was what and did what and what they were like. Then I realized that Jeremy had already done it on the inside front cover. But this fella right here in the end, Anders, he's Phil's partner in crime and often wears a zombie mask to protect his identity. And he gets his own backup story. Get a Real Job, starring Anders the Zombie, and it is a wordless, brief, one gag joke strip that I really quite enjoyed, and so I hope to see more Anders. And then the last backup story actually features either the father of the guitarist and narrator Mark, or no, it's just a story told by the youth pastor and his youth group about this Christian scientist named Zane Zanders, done in kind of a retro vintage comic style. You've got some Zipatone color palette going on, but basically the story of a recording made by a Christian scientist, and I don't know if that means from the faith or from... just the fact that he was an adventurer and scientist who was also evangelical Christian, but kind of a story of the disconnect and tension between credulity and reality, faith and science. And it's a story that Mark is telling to the rest of the band about something that he learned and heard at youth group at his church, and the rest of the band is rightfully questioning it and challenging the story. And so an interesting backup story that goes into a part that's referred to in the main story, but not expanded on. And so really, really interesting. Also interesting, I didn't look into this to see what it actually reminded me of, but throughout this story, Phil is referring to Cassie as the Yoko that's going to break up the band. And that's a term and a concept that I've been familiar with over the years, and until just recently realized that the popular conception of Yoko breaking up the Beatles might actually be a myth, or at least more nuanced than just a girlfriend coming in, asserting creative ideas, and disrupting a band that already had interesting creative forces. And hardcore Beatles fans, feel free to flame me. I don't know enough to actually defend this point of view. But what I read recently was that not only was Yoko Ono a writer, artist, and musician on her own, but she had collaborated and performed with musicians, including people like Ornette Coleman. I don't know if Ornette Coleman was actually one of the actual examples or someone like him, but came into dating Lennon and being with the Beatles, kind of presuming a collaborative creative experience similar to that which she had already experienced with other musicians of note. And so she might not have been someone coming in out of left field with no experience or background, certainly, disrupting this band that already had its own cozy thing going on, but might have come into a band hoping to have fun and play and collaborate in a way that she had with other relatively well-known and storied and experienced musicians, having held her own previously. And so I'd never heard or read that before. So anyway, I was thinking about that while reading this comic, that Cassie perhaps was not the destructive force that Phil was setting her up to be, or that the band was interpreting her to be, but perhaps was, a potentially equal collaborator that could have brought something new to the mix. So an interesting comic that made me think about stuff other than the comic, which is always cool. So Jeremy Massey, he's got a website, masseymakescomics.com. Massey is spelled Massie. Worth checking out. Happy to see this getting distribution through Diamond. Happy to see it moving from Indiegogo to a broader distribution, and looking forward to see what he does with the rest of the issues, if he's got more planned, and hoping to see more backup stories. Every issue should have backup stories like this issue did. They were a lot of fun. And check it out. Holler, #2 by Jeremy Massey. published by It's Alive. Presuming it's self-published, but it might actually be a small publishing company. The indicia directs you to Jeremy's website, so It's Alive might just be his own thing. But enjoyed it a lot. Reminded me of Fantagraphics books from back in the 90s with kind of a modern take. Very cool. All right. Thanks a lot, Jeremy. Have a good day, everybody.